He walked in like any other man, alone, calm, unarmed. Not a camera in sight. Just clean shoes, quiet steps, and a watch worth more than the rent on half the block. But the moment he crossed that glass threshold, you could feel it. He didn't belong here. Not because he lacked money, not because he lacked class, but because every smile in that room knew how to curve differently depending on who you were. The receptionist didn't ask for his name. She asked him to leave. The manager didn't ask what he wanted. She called security. And the security guard didn't ask any questions, just walked him out like he tried to steal something. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He didn't flinch. But someone should have asked one thing before they slammed the door behind him. Who was he? Because by the time they found out, it was already too late. What if the man you humiliated owned the building you worked in? This is not just a story about jewelry. This is about ego, about masks, about a system so confident in its own perfection, it forgot to look twice. If you're still watching, hit that like button, subscribe for the full series, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And at what moment did you feel something was off? You won't believe what happens next. The morning air was cool and clean, typical for Los Angeles in late spring. Julian Carter stepped out of the sleek black Escalade parked discreetly at the corner of Rodeo Drive and made his way toward the flagship location of Sterling & Rose, the high-end jewelry store nestled between luxury fashion giants and international watch boutiques. From the outside, the store radiated quiet opulence, floor-to-ceiling glass windows framed by matte black steel, minimalist gold accents, and a logo etched subtly into the marble. Inside was another world. Polished stone floors that whispered money with each footstep, glass cases glowing with the soft white light of embedded LEDs, and a curated ambience that said only a certain kind of person belonged here. Julian walked through the glass doors without hesitation. He wore a tailored charcoal bomber jacket, dark jeans, and a black t-shirt. No logos, no noise, but everything about him. The way he moved, the stillness in his eyes, the calm calculation in each step, radiated control. He didn't dress to be seen, he dressed to see. The store was quiet. A faint melody of instrumental jazz drifted in from hidden speakers, and behind a curved marble counter stood a young blonde woman wearing a high-collared black blouse and a tight, practiced smile. Her name tag read Madison. She looked up as Julian entered, her expression faltering for half a second before settling back into professional neutrality. "Can I help you?" she asked. The tone was polite, but it had the slight bend of expectation, that he would be lost or in the wrong place or about to ask a question she had no patience to answer. "Just browsing," Julian said, stepping toward one of the nearest displays. "I might be interested in something custom." "Custom work is by appointment only," Madison replied immediately. She had shifted to stand more squarely between Julian and the display, her hands clasped in front of her like a gatekeeper. Julian raised an eyebrow, letting his eyes drift to the side where the glass case shimmered with emerald-cut stones set in platinum. "I didn't see a sign." "It's understood," she said tight-lipped. Before Julian could respond, the air in the room changed again, heels clicking sharply against the floor, the scent of rosewood and status slicing through the space. Veronica Hale emerged from the back hallway like she was stepping onto a stage. Late 30s, poised, stylish in a blood-red blazer that matched her lipstick precisely. She exuded authority in the way only someone desperate to be perceived as superior could. Her eyes landed on Julian, scanning him like a barcode. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, voice silked with steel. Madison didn't hesitate. "He doesn't have an appointment." I explained the policy. Veronica gave a small, cold smile. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We're currently preparing for a private client session." Julian's tone remained even. "I'm not interfering, just browsing." "Our clientele," Veronica said, enunciating each syllable with measured contempt, "expect a certain level of exclusivity. If you'd like to schedule a visit, you can go online." "I see," Julian said slowly. "And does this level of exclusivity usually require an escort out the door?" Veronica blinked. "Excuse me. You've made it clear I'm not welcome. Might as well finish the performance." Veronica's eyes flicked to the security camera above the counter. Then she turned her head and snapped her fingers once. Derek. A man emerged from a hallway, 6'3", built like a linebacker in a suit that tried too hard to hide it. His expression was blank. Professional. Please escort Mr. Veronica let the title hang. Carter, Julian supplied. Julian Carter. Mr. Carter, Veronica finished with a tight smile. Please show him to the door. Derek moved forward. Sir, if you'll follow me. Julian didn't move. Not immediately. He looked past Veronica to the cases, to the product that had taken years of craftsmanship and millions of dollars to cure it. Then his gaze returned to hers. It's a beautiful space, he said. Impeccably designed. Exceptional lighting. Good energy. Veronica's jaw flexed. Thank you, she said, though her tone suggested the opposite. Julian stepped back toward the entrance, his hands in his pockets, his smile quiet but razor-edged. It's a shame when energy gets poisoned by bad judgment. He walked out without another word, Derek shadowing him to the sidewalk. The door closed behind him with a whisper softness. He stood outside for a beat, then pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts and tapped on a name, Elise Monroe. She picked up on the second ring. They bit, she asked. Hard, Julian said. We have it all. 2 camera angles. Clean audio. They called security within 3 minutes. Send it to Devlin, Julian replied. And get me a copy. You want to go nuclear already? Elise asked. Not yet, Julian said. I want to see how deep this rock goes. You sure you don't want to just walk in there with a deed and burn it down? Julian smiled, eyes still on the building. No, I want them to bury themselves. I want them to make it undeniable. He hung up and slid the phone into his pocket. Veronica Hale thought today was just another shift. Just another day of gatekeeping a world she thought she owned. She didn't know the man she just threw out was the founder of the very brand whose name hung above her head in gold-plated steel. She didn't know he'd once spent 5 years building the foundation of the very company whose values she now mocked with every dismissive glance. But she would know his name, and so would everyone else. And when the time came, she wouldn't be able to blink without seeing the consequences she had invited in. A matte black tailored jacket over a clean white collarless shirt, designer raw denim jeans, and on his wrist, a limited edition Audemars Piguet Royal Oak encrusted with black diamonds, an elegant monster worth over $200,000. He walked through the door with measured calm, posture relaxed, eyes scanning the displays again, not because he needed anything, but because he wanted to test if anything inside had changed, or if the rot was still there. Madison was behind the counter again, her hair tied in the same knot, her eyes still performing that quick up-down scan the moment Julian entered. Her reaction didn't improve from last time. If anything, her frown deepened, as though she remembered him but wasn't sure from where. Julian approached the center display case. Inside, a series of platinum and sapphire rings shimmered beneath soft, cold light. He leaned slightly forward, letting the watch on his wrist catch the display's glow as he turned it subtly, like bait. Madison cleared her throat, then stepped forward, arms folded. "May I help you?" she said, and Julian caught the edge of her hesitation. She recognized the watch, or at least its silhouette, but refused to believe it was real, refused to believe it belonged on him. Julian didn't flinch. "I'm interested in commissioning a matching bracelet," he said evenly. "Something minimalist. Custom metal blend. I wanted to see if you do carbon black platinum." Madison looked at his wrist again, then at his face, as if trying to solve a puzzle that irritated her simply by existing. "We don't carry replicas here," she said flatly. Julian blinked. "I'm sorry. The watch," she clarified. "If it's not real, I can't match a custom piece to it. We only work with verified luxury products." Julian let the silence stretch. The air between them was thick with condescension, and yet he stayed calm. "It's authentic," he said, "but you're welcome to scan the serial." "We don't validate outside items," she replied, then leaned forward slightly and lowered her voice, as if doing him a favor. "Look, there's a shop 2 blocks away that specializes in affordable recreations. They might be able to match that finish for you." Julian chuckled once under his breath, a sound more blade than laugh. Affordable recreations, he repeated. You're assuming a lot. No offense, Madison said, the words of cowards everywhere, but we've had a lot of people come in lately trying to look the part. Before Julian could answer, a familiar sound echoed from the hallway behind the counter. Heels on tile, sharp and certain. Veronica Hale appeared like a ghost summoned by discomfort. She paused when she saw Julian, her expression tightening for just a second before slipping back into that manufactured smile. We've met before, she said. Julian nodded, his tone flat. Briefly. Veronica crossed her arms. Are you still browsing? Or did you come back to film something this time? Julian tilted his head, not bothering to hide the smile playing at the edge of his lips. Should I have? Veronica stepped forward, her gaze flicking to his wrist. That watch. Are you actually trying to pass it off as real? Madison interjected quickly. I already told him we don't service counterfeits. And I already said it's authentic, Julian said calmly, eyes locked on Veronica. Would you like the verification documents? Veronica's eyes narrowed. I've seen enough, she said, then turned to Madison. Escort him out. On what grounds? Julian asked, not angry, not even surprised, just curious. Loitering, Veronica snapped. And disrupting the atmosphere. Madison stepped from behind the counter, already motioning toward the entrance. Please leave, sir. Julian stayed rooted for a moment, just enough to remind them he moved only when he decided to. You're making this very easy, he said, then finally turned and walked out without another word. Outside, he paused beside a planter, pulled out his phone, and called Elise again. She answered instantly. Tell me you were rolling, he said. Wide angle and mic'd, she replied. Veronica called you a loiterer. It's a gift. And the watch. I zoomed in. Anyone who knows anything will see the custom bezel. It's one of one. Julian let out a long breath, almost a laugh. Then it's working. You want to go public? Elise asked. Not yet. One more pass. Julian's voice turned sharp. They still think this is about them versus an annoying customer. I want them to show their teeth. He ended the call and glanced back at the storefront. 3 nights after his second visit, Julian Carter arrived at the Beverly Hills Grand Atrium for the Sterling and Rose Legacy of Light Gala, a high-profile awards night celebrating innovation and investment in luxury craftsmanship. It was an invitation-only event, tailored for media, designers, venture capitalists, and brand executives. The kind of gathering where people didn't just wear success, they wore proof of it. The atrium was draped in crystal chandeliers, its entry flanked by velvet ropes and flashbulbs. A golden carpet stretched across the entrance, leading into a ballroom designed to look like the inside of a jewel box. And Julian Carter, dressed in a deep navy tuxedo custom-tailored in Milan, stepped out of a black car with a posture of someone arriving not to be seen, but to take note. He didn't bring an entourage. He didn't need one. What he carried tonight was intent. He had arrived early on purpose, watching the flow of guests, the pacing of photographers, the rhythm of how prestige moved. A clipboard-holding assistant with a headset ushered guests forward in pairs. Security flanked the ropes. Veronica Hale stood about 10 feet from the entryway, wearing a form-fitting emerald gown, her hair in a chignon, smiling and whispering to other executives. Her confidence was loud. Julian kept to the edge of the carpet, waiting his turn, observing how she directed traffic, not just physically, but socially. She held sway here, or so she believed. When it was his turn, Julian moved forward with measured grace, handed his invitation card, issued from corporate under an alias, to the gate assistant, who scanned it, nodded, and stepped aside. For a moment, it looked seamless. Then Veronica turned. Her eyes landed on him, and just like that, her smile dropped half a millimeter. It was quick, surgical. She crossed over, heels silent on the gold carpet, and cut between Julian and the entry doors. "Excuse me," she said sweetly, placing a hand on the assistant's clipboard. "There's been a mistake." The assistant blinked, confused. His name came up clear. "There's no way," Veronica said. Her voice still dipped in sugar. "We have a very controlled list. Let me double-check with corporate." She turned to Julian. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside for a moment." Julian raised one brow, said nothing, and stepped laterally toward the ropes, where he stood facing the atrium doors like an observer, not a guest. Behind him, a photographer crouched, camera clicking. The flash caught Julian's profile, sharp lines, confident stance, perfectly calculated shadows. Veronica noticed. She moved fast. "Hey," she hissed, stepping toward the photographer. "Stop." "Not him." The man paused, confused. "He's dressed for the event. He's not part of the main guest list," she snapped. "Don't waste film on someone who doesn't belong." Julian heard it. Every word. He didn't turn around. Instead, he pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and casually typed a message. "You're going to love this one. Get ready to roll live." The text sent, he looked up just in time to see Richard Grant, his friend and business partner, arriving in a separate vehicle. Richard wore a sharp white dinner jacket, patent leather shoes, and the kind of confidence that radiated approval. Julian caught his eye. Richard gave a faint nod. Showtime. Veronica hadn't noticed him yet. She was still smoothing her dress and managing the PR chaos she had just created. Behind her, the line had backed up. One of the security guards checked his phone, stepped toward the assistant, and whispered something into her ear. Her eyes widened. She looked at Julian again, then at the guard, then at her tablet. "He's cleared," she whispered. "And not just cleared, he's on the VIP list." Veronica turned, a slow horror dawning on her face like spilled ink. "What did you say?" "Mr. Carter, platinum tier investor, corporate level sponsor." Her voice dropped. "He's also one of the main shareholders." Veronica's face froze, then melted into a smile so artificial it might have been factory made. She took a step toward Julian. "Mr. Carter, my goodness, I should step inside," Julian said, cutting her off. "Wouldn't want to miss the opening remarks." He walked past her, not fast, not slow, just deliberate. And in that moment, Veronica Hale knew she'd made a mistake she could never undo. The flashbulbs caught his stride. Every angle, every step. She followed 3 paces behind, smiling through gritted teeth. But it was too late. She'd already shown the world exactly who she was when she thought no one important was watching. The Monday after the gala, Julian Carter scheduled an appointment with Sterling and Rose under a corporate alias used by several VIP clients across multiple divisions of Carter and Wolf Holdings. The booking was confirmed within minutes. Custom consultation for exclusive platinum sapphire wrist set, flagged urgent by corporate connections and greenlit directly by regional scheduling. Veronica Hale, of course, received the appointment notification like any other top-tier request. Anonymous, high-profile, and potentially lucrative. She took it seriously. That morning, she arrived at the boutique early, instructed the staff to deep clean the consultation area, and had the champagne chilled 2 hours in advance. Veronica believed she was preparing for another hedge fund baby or tech millionaire with a taste for understated flex. She had no idea that the same man she had humiliated on the golden carpet would be the one walking through the door that morning, and that he was walking in not to expose her, but to see just how far she was willing to go when she thought no one important was watching. At 10:03 a.m., the front bell chimed. Julian stepped in alone, dressed in a crisp light gray suit with a black collar, the perfect blend of power and restraint. No camera crew, no entourage, just calm, confident, quiet. Madison was behind the counter again. The way she flinched when she recognized him said everything. But before she could speak, Veronica emerged from the back, her heels ticking across the marble like warning shots. She stopped mid-step, blinking twice. "You," she said, more to herself than to him. Julian smiled politely. 10 o'clock appointment. Custom fitting. "You used an alias," she accused. "Company protocol," Julian replied evenly. "It protects VIP clients from unsolicited exposure." Veronica's eyes darted to Madison, then back to Julian. Her voice dropped an octave. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but it ends here. I know the type come in pretending to order, then post a video about how we treated you differently. It's a whole TikTok hustle now." "I'm not filming anything," Julian said. "I'm here for a consultation, which I booked, confirmed, and prepaid." "You think I'm stupid?" she snapped. "You think you can fake your way into credibility with a nice suit and a polished watch? I don't care what list you hacked your name onto. This isn't that kind of store." Julian stared at her, and in that silence, something dangerous settled in the room. Veronica didn't flinch. She was too deep in her own arrogance to feel it. She turned to Madison. "Cancel his appointment. Now." Madison hesitated. But now, Madison moved toward the tablet. Julian didn't stop her. He just turned slightly, letting the moment sit, marinate, and calcify in the air around them. Then the bell above the door chimed again. A man in his 50s walked in, dressed in golf attire with a Rolex Daytona and a spray tan that said West Palm Beach. He carried no appointment, no name on the list. But the moment Veronica saw him, she transformed. "Mr. Langford," she said, her voice warm, sweetened with attention. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you today." The man grinned. "Just in town for a few hours. Thought I'd stop by and see if you had anything new worth showing off." "Of course," Veronica beamed. "I was about to start a fitting, but we can postpone that. Please come with me." She turned, then hesitated. "Actually," she gestured toward the table where Julian had just been directed before being cut off. "Why don't we try the new platinum sapphire cuffs that gentleman just touched? See if they suit you better." Julian froze. Not because he was surprised, but because the mask had finally fallen all the way off. The disdain was no longer coded. It was overt, intentional, audacious. And everyone in the store felt it. Madison went still. A junior associate near the back fumbled a jewelry tray. Langford didn't even blink. He smiled, nodded, and followed her toward the display. Julian looked at the empty space he was supposed to sit in, the tray already prepared for him, the champagne still bubbling in tall flutes beside a velvet-lined box. Then he turned and walked out without a word. This time, he didn't call Elise. He didn't record anything. He didn't send a message. He didn't need to. The performance had reached its peak. Veronica Hale, with no pressure, no camera, and no reason to filter herself, had revealed everything. Her contempt, her arrogance, her eagerness to please only those who fit her imagined ideal of wealth. And in doing so, she had walked willingly into the trap Julian had designed for her from day one. 2 days after Veronica humiliated him in front of Langford, Julian decided to take the gloves off. No more passive observation. No more letting her write her own obituary with arrogance alone. It was time to stress test the system. He called Richard Grant, his closest friend and longtime business partner. Tall, white, polished Ivy League to the bone, with the exact kind of smile that opened doors without resistance. Julian explained the plan in 30 seconds. Richard laughed once, low and amused. "Let's go shopping," he said. Friday afternoon. The store was busy, but not crowded. A perfect environment for controlled chaos. Julian entered first, dressed in all black. Slacks, turtleneck, jacket. Clean, minimalist, forgettable. He carried a slim leather folio under one arm, the kind assistants carry. Richard followed 5 steps behind, wearing a pale blue blazer, tan trousers, suede loafers, and a Rolex Skydweller that caught the light every time he moved. His hair was slicked back, his posture relaxed, and his presence impossible to ignore. The moment they stepped in, Madison's head snapped up. She hesitated, clearly recognizing Julian, but the moment her eyes shifted to Richard, her entire demeanor changed. A sparkle lit her smile. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. Welcome to Sterling and Rose." "Afternoon," Richard replied casually. "Heard you have a new rose gold collection in." "We do," Madison said, stepping out from behind the counter, posture straight, voice bright. "Right this way. Would you like champagne while you browse?" Richard looked over at Julian, nodded. "Sure. Bring 2." Madison gave Julian a brief glance, brief, cold, dismissive, then disappeared into the back. Veronica appeared moments later, stepping out like a performer, hitting her cue. Her eyes locked on Richard immediately. Her smile widened. "Welcome," she said warmly, extending a hand. I'm Veronica Hale, Regional Manager. Richard Grant, he replied, shaking her hand with a practiced grip. Big fan of your brand. We're honored, Veronica said, eyes gleaming. We always appreciate men of refinement. Style, vision. You fit this space perfectly. Julian stood to the side, silently observing. He watched as Veronica steered Richard toward the premium showcase, walking him through every detail of the new line, giving background on the Italian metalwork, referencing designers by first name, quoting limited production counts. It was a masterclass in flattery. Julian waited 5 minutes, then stepped closer. That diamond clasp would pair well with a cooler metal base, he said casually, gesturing to a piece. Maybe palladium? Veronica didn't look at him. Her voice didn't change tone. We're currently speaking with our client. Richard turned to Julian. What do you think? I think the contrast would give it more visual weight without overselling the warmth, Julian replied. It anchors the sparkle. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Interesting. Veronica finally looked at Julian then, but it wasn't acknowledgement, it was irritation. We don't usually consult with assistants, she said, still smiling. Though I admire your enthusiasm. Julian raised one brow. I'm not his assistant. Veronica blinked. Oh, I assumed. You assumed, Julian cut in gently. Based on what? She hesitated, lips parting, then closing again. Richard interjected smoothly. He's the head of acquisitions at my firm, he said. Nothing goes into our collection without his eye on it first. Veronica recovered with a forced chuckle. Well, I suppose we all make mistakes. Julian smiled, slow and surgical. Yes, some of us make them professionally. She stared at him for half a second too long, then pivoted back to Richard. Let's try the signature cuff. I think it'll complement your wrist shape beautifully. Madison returned with 2 flutes of champagne. She handed one to Richard, then paused, turned to Julian, and, without a word, set the second glass back on her tray. We're short on glassware, she said. Julian tilted his head, not even bothering to respond. Richard looked between them, visibly displeased. You know, he said, I actually changed my mind. I don't think I'm buying anything today. Veronica's eyes flashed. Is something wrong? No, Richard said smoothly. But something's off. He handed the glass back to Madison, gave Julian a look, and walked toward the exit. Julian followed without comment. Outside, the sunlight was sharp. Richard exhaled through his nose. They failed, he said. Spectacularly. I know, Julian replied. And we have everything on audio. What's next? Richard asked. Julian pulled out his phone, opened the voice memo, and hit save. Now we show the board what's been festering under their nose. He paused. But first, we let them do it one more time. The following week, Julian Carter sat at his desk overlooking downtown Los Angeles, staring at a single line on a notepad. Intentional bias requires intentional exposure. What happened with Richard had been undeniable proof of discrimination, but it was still not enough not to tear down an entire management culture from the inside. He needed one final variable, one that removed himself from the equation entirely. That's when he looked across the room at Elise Monroe, who had just walked in holding a press kit draft. They need one more push, Julian said. Elise set the folder down. What are you thinking? You, Julian said. Alone. No cameras. No setup. Just you. Looking for a ring. She raised one eyebrow. You want me to go shopping for a fake engagement ring? Not fake, Julian replied. Hypothetical. Elise stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Let's see how real they get when it's not you. Saturday morning, Elise walked into Sterling and Rose wearing a navy blue midi dress, nude heels, and minimal jewelry, just enough to suggest she belonged, but not so much that she'd be mistaken for rich by accident. Her hair was tied back, her makeup clean and understated. In one hand, she carried a small leather clutch. Her demeanor was poised, relaxed. She had rehearsed her story. A newly engaged woman whose fiancé worked in finance, shopping alone for design inspiration before making the final decision together. The store was bright and pristine as always. Soft instrumental music floated through the space. Elise stepped in with a gentle smile, scanning the cases like any curious client. Madison noticed her first. Her expression was neutral at best, but not openly hostile. "Welcome to Sterling and Rose," she said, voice carefully controlled. "How can I help you?" Elise approached the diamond ring section. "I was hoping to see some engagement styles. My fiancé's away on business, but I wanted to get a feel for the design direction we both like." "Of course," Madison replied, her smile still not reaching her eyes. "Do you have a budget range in mind?" "Somewhere between 75 and 100,000, Elise said. It was a believable range, generous, but not outrageous for the clientele Sterling and Rose claimed to attract. Madison nodded. "One moment." She disappeared behind the consultation counter. Elise waited patiently, admiring a cushion-cut halo piece through the glass. Less than a minute later, Madison returned, but her tone had shifted. "Actually, we usually begin with financial verification before presenting high-value inventory. I hope you understand. It's standard procedure." Elise blinked. "I wasn't aware that was necessary just to browse." "It is for pieces above a certain value," Madison replied. "If you'd like, we can direct you to our lower-tier preview collection while we confirm credentials." Elise's smile didn't break, but her voice chilled by a degree. "No need. I've already seen enough." She turned as if to leave, but paused when the door chimed and another couple entered. White, mid-30s, wearing athleisure and designer sunglasses. They hadn't made an appointment. Elise stepped aside, watching as Madison's posture lifted. "Good morning," Madison chirped. "May I offer you a glass of champagne while you browse?" The woman smiled. "That'd be wonderful." Madison didn't ask for verification. She didn't mention credentials. She simply poured. Elise didn't move. She simply observed. Across the room, Veronica Hale emerged, laughing at something a junior associate had just said. She noticed Elise standing off to the side and leaned toward Madison. Her voice wasn't loud, but it wasn't hidden either. "Let me guess," she muttered. "Trying to touch something expensive for TikTok? What's the trend now? Fake fiancé reveals." Madison chuckled nervously. She said her budget was 100 grand. Veronica rolled her eyes. 100 grand? For a ring? From her? Please. Black girls don't buy white sapphires. They rent them. Watch her ask to try on something and then claim we disrespected her when we say no. Elise heard every word. So did Ava Hill, a junior associate shadowing near the back. Elise locked eyes with Ava for just a second, just long enough to know that someone else in the room had registered the insult. She didn't speak. She didn't confront. She walked straight out. 3 hours later, Ava stood outside a downtown office building, clutching a tote bag and looking around nervously. Julian opened the door for her himself. Inside his office, she sat down across from him, hands tight in her lap. "I know who you are," she said before he could speak. "I've known since your first visit." Julian nodded. "That's not why I called you here." Ava reached into her bag, pulled out a small recording device, and slid it across the table. "I didn't mean to record it, but I did. And after today, I couldn't ignore it anymore." Julian pressed play. Veronica's voice crackled from a speaker, venomous and unmistakable. "Black girls don't buy white sapphires." Julian leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and looked out the window at the city below. It was no longer about proving it was personal. Now he had proof it was systemic. Julian Carter was done playing small. The recordings from Ava, combined with Elisa's first-hand account and Richard's testimony, painted a picture too precise to ignore. This was no longer about a single store manager. It was about culture, an ecosystem poisoned from the inside out. From his office in Century City, Julian composed a memo addressed to the Vice President of Retail Operations at Carter & Wolf Holdings, CC'd directly to the board's Oversight Division and the firm's DEI Executive Liaison. The subject line read, "Urgent. Immediate compliance review Sterling and Rose Beverly Hills." Within the body, Julian outlined a formal trigger for a surprise third-party audit under the company's customer experience and ethics protocol. He flagged concerns of racially biased service patterns, financial discrimination, and failure to follow corporate inclusion training policy. No names, no personal accusations, just evidence-based triggers that made the audit mandatory. Once the message was encrypted and sent through his private executive channel, Julian leaned back in his chair and watched the first domino fall. It hit the inbox of a woman named Andrea Blake, Senior Vice President of Brand Integrity, who had worked with Julian directly for 6 years. She didn't ask questions. She sent the audit command within 20 minutes. By noon, the directive landed at the Sterling and Rose flagship under a nondescript subject: Internal Quality Review Notice Tier 3 Evaluation. Veronica Hale received the email while in the middle of preparing for a private walkthrough with a Russian jeweler. Her assistant brought her tablet mid-appointment. Veronica frowned, scrolled, then froze. Her eyes moved faster as she reread the language. All staff must complete individual service logs by close of business. Transaction footage from the past 21 days will be reviewed by the Brand Standards Committee. Interviews will be scheduled within 48 hours. Do not alter or delete any internal data, security files, or communications. Compliance is mandatory. Veronica stood motionless for a moment, then forced a tight smile. "Apologies," she told the client. "Something urgent just came up. My associate will continue the tour." She stepped away, retreating to the staff office. Once inside, she locked the door, opened the full memo on her laptop, and read it again, this time slower. Her heart thudded once, loud and unfamiliar. This wasn't a routine audit. This was a warning shot. She dialed Madison first. "Don't say anything stupid during your interview," she said without introduction. "And don't mention anyone we've turned away. Just stick to high-level policy talk." Madison hesitated. "Is something wrong?" "We're being targeted," Veronica hissed. "Some woke executive at the top is trying to crucify us. Just say everything's by the book." "Got it." Madison murmured something noncommittal and hung up. Across town, Julian watched as the audit timer counted down from 72 hours. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. That afternoon, an anonymous feedback portal was pushed live for customers who had visited the Beverly Hills store in the past 30 days. Dozens of entries came pouring in, some glowing, but others were scathing. A woman named Camille Yates wrote about how she was told, "We don't loan items for people to just pose with," even though she had asked to try on a bracelet after placing a $5,000 deposit. A college professor named Elijah Brooks described being asked for 3 forms of ID before being shown a ring worth more than his car, despite coming in with a corporate partner badge and cash in hand. One line kept appearing in different forms: "I just didn't feel like they thought I belonged there." Julian's team filtered the entries and cross-referenced timestamps, with camera logs quietly retrieved from a system. It all lined up. Across the boutique, little acts of coded bias formed a pattern too consistent to dismiss. That evening, Julian received an encrypted message from Ava Hill. It contained an unedited transcript of her exit interview, recorded on her personal phone. The HR rep had asked routine questions, but when Ava brought up Veronica's comments, the tone shifted fast. "Are you alleging misconduct?" "I'm stating what I heard," Ava had said calmly. "And I'm sharing it because I believe in what this company says it stands for." Julian sat in the dark, playing the clip 3 times. Then he closed his laptop and called Elise. "It's working," he said. "They're reacting." "Are they unraveling yet?" she asked. "Not yet," Julian replied. "But the cracks are visible. Veronica's going to scramble now. She'll dig herself deeper, trying to cover it up." "You're not worried she'll figure out you're behind it?" Elise asked. "Let her," Julian said. "The more she suspects, the harder she'll push back. That's how you make arrogance turn inward. That's how you weaponize ego." A long-form exposé was published on a rising independent news blog called The Equitable Line. The title read, "Behind the Glass: My Experience with Polite Racism at a Luxury Jewelry Store." The author was listed as Cassandra Blake, a pseudonym Elise had chosen carefully to avoid early detection. The article was long, immersive, and devastating. It detailed her experience at Sterling and Rose as a black woman seeking an engagement ring, the subtle humiliation wrapped in policy language, the champagne offered selectively, the dismissiveness of the staff, and most damning of all, the manager's quiet but venomous comments caught clearly by proximity. Elise didn't name the store directly, but the clues were unmistakable: the location, the layout, the phrases used by staff. Within an hour, the post had gone viral across X and Instagram, amplified by influencers, DI advocates, and watchdog accounts who specialized in tracking retail discrimination. Hashtags like #NotSoSterling and #JewelryWhileBlack trended by noon. Screenshots of the article circled every major platform. Veronica saw the piece when she opened her phone during lunch and nearly dropped it onto the marble counter. At first, she dismissed it as another internet rant, until she realized how many reposts were coming from verified accounts. A wave of panic rose in her chest. Within the hour, 2 local journalists had emailed the store's press contact for a statement. She immediately pulled Madison and her floor assistant into the back room. Nobody talks to press. Nobody responds to anything. This will blow over. But the staff weren't so sure. That evening, Veronica appeared on a friend's business podcast, Retail Royalty, for a pre-scheduled interview. Instead of canceling, she leaned into the fire, confident she could reframe the narrative. When the host asked her to address the viral article, Veronica rolled her eyes lightly and said, "It's unfortunate. Some people walk into high-end spaces expecting to be treated like royalty, without understanding that luxury environments require a certain type of behavior. If you show up looking like you don't belong, acting defensive from the moment you step in, you're going to create that experience for yourself. We treat all our guests professionally, but not everyone is a match for every brand." The clip was posted before the podcast even ended. Within 20 minutes, the backlash exploded. Comments flooded the feed, furious, mocking, outraged. So luxury has a look now. She just admitted to profiling on air. Guests were all too uncivilized to wear diamonds. Elise and Julian watched the chaos unfold from their downtown apartment. She sat on the couch with her laptop, reading reactions while sipping tea. Julian stood behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight. "She's unraveling," Elise said. "Exactly on schedule," Julian replied. "But it's not enough. We need to keep her spiraling." That night, Ava Hill sent a second message. She had more. A 3-minute voice recording. Clear, calm, cutthroat. Veronica's voice was unmistakable. "I don't care how much they say they can spend. If they don't look the part, we don't waste the time. Half these influencer types are broke anyway. And don't get me started on the ones who come in just to accuse us of bias. Like that one with the natural hair and the sad little clutch. Playing Cinderella doesn't make you royalty." Julian played the audio 3 times before he forwarded it to his private media team with one line: "Hold for impact." On Friday morning, Elise published part 2 of the article, titled "The Mic Was On: What They Really Said About Shoppers Who Look Like Me." This time, she embedded the recording in the middle of the post. The effect was instant and brutal. Comments turned to outrage. Reposts doubled. Petitions started. Celebrities tweeted. One famous actress quoted the article and wrote, "This is why we build our own," and burned down the rest. By mid-afternoon, Sterling and Rose's corporate office had issued a bland PR statement. "We are aware of the recent allegations. Sterling and Rose is committed to diversity, inclusion, and equal treatment of all guests. We are reviewing the matter internally." No apology, no ownership, and that silence spoke volumes. At the store, Veronica could barely keep control. Clients canceled appointments. Deliveries were delayed. One by one, her junior staff began requesting time off or reassignments. Madison refused to cover the front desk. Ava resigned in writing, without notice. Veronica called the regional office and demanded they intervene. "This is a witch hunt," she barked into the phone. "Some anonymous woman on the internet is slandering me. I've been loyal for years." The voice on the other end was calm. "Veronica, there's a full audit underway. You'll have your chance to speak during your session." "You think this came out of nowhere?" she snapped. "Someone set me up." Across town, Julian sat in his office reviewing the headlines. Elise closed her laptop and stood by the window, watching the sun dip over the skyline. "You think she knows it's you yet?" she asked. "Not yet," Julian said, adjusting his cufflink. "But she's close. She can feel it. And that's exactly where I want her, desperate, exposed, and a little too confident she can still survive this." He turned off his screen, stood, and walked over to the bar cart. "Because tomorrow we stop playing anonymous." Elise raised her glass to the final curtain. Julian clinked his glass gently against hers. "And to the ones who think they're untouchable." The storm that had brewed online erupted into the boardroom. Carter and Wolf Holdings scheduled an emergency executive session, listed on the internal calendar only as CX Oversight Review Tier 1 compliance flag. It was held at the company's private headquarters on Wilshire Boulevard, floor 28, the space reserved for crisis meetings and shareholder disputes. Veronica Hale received the invitation at 6:42 a.m. The email was brief. "Your attendance is required. Please arrive at 9:30 a.m. sharp." No explanation, no detail. But Veronica didn't see it as a threat. She saw it as an opportunity. In her mind, this was damage control, a chance to clarify her side, to present herself as a loyal manager unfairly dragged into public drama by a viral smear campaign. She wore her sharpest blazer, pinned her hair with surgical precision, and applied her signature blood-red lipstick. Her stride into the building was confident, controlled, unbothered, until she stepped into the boardroom. Because seated at the head of the long glass table, surrounded by executives she'd only seen in quarterly updates, was Julian Carter. She froze mid-step. Her heart stuttered once, a clean break in the rhythm of her confidence. Julian didn't move. He didn't blink. He simply looked at her. "Ms. Hale," he said evenly, "please have a seat." Veronica sat slowly, her posture shifting in increments. Her smile faltered but didn't collapse. "Mr. Carter," she said, trying to mask her disbelief. "I wasn't aware you would be joining us." "You've worked under my portfolio for 6 years," Julian said, voice measured. "Perhaps it's time we were properly introduced." The room was silent. At least 10 executives sat in observation. Legal, PR, DI, compliance. The head of human capital closed the door. Julian nodded once to the man seated beside the wall. The lights dimmed. A large screen lowered from the ceiling. Then, without commentary, the playback began. First, a sequence of time-stamped security footage, Veronica refusing service to multiple black clients over a period of weeks. Next, a grainy audio clip of her mocking Elise. The final blow, her podcast appearance, broadcast in full unedited, every word hanging in the air like poison. Veronica sat frozen, her hands clenched on her lap, her jaw set tighter with each passing frame. When the lights returned, Julian leaned forward. "Do you recognize your voice, Ms. Hale?" Veronica opened her mouth, closed it, then forced a breath. "I was taken out of context." "Which part?" Julian asked. "The part where you said our clients don't look the part? Or the part where you said black girls don't buy white sapphires?" She looked to the other executives, hoping for support. None came. "This is a witch hunt," she said finally. "I was targeted." "You were documented," Julian replied. "Repeatedly. And now the board must evaluate the scope of your misconduct." "Misconduct?" Veronica laughed once, high and brittle. "You're acting like this is a scandal. This is retail. It's about vibe. It's about protecting the brand." "You've confused protecting the brand," Julian said coldly, "with protecting your own prejudice." Silence fell again. Then the door opened. Ava Hill stepped in, flanked by an HR representative. She looked directly at Veronica and said, "I submitted my testimony voluntarily." Veronica recoiled. You don't remember what you said," Ava continued. "But I do. And now so does everyone else." Julian stood. "Ms. Hale, effective immediately. You are relieved of your duties. Legal will contact you regarding the next steps in your separation. You are no longer authorized to represent Sterling and Rose in any capacity." Veronica's face turned stone. Her eyes burned with rage. But she didn't argue. She didn't plead. Because deep down she knew. She stood, adjusted her blazer, and walked out without another word. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed. Julian looked at the room. "Let this serve as precedent," he said. "Discrimination, overt or insidious, has no place in this company. Not in our stores, not in our culture, not under my name." 1 week after Veronica Hale walked out of that boardroom, her name had been quietly removed from every system, every storefront, every digital roster across Carter and Wolf Holdings. Her company email bounced back auto replies. Her office keycard was deactivated. And within days, the retail world knew. Her photo was pulled from promotional archives. Brand partners ceased communication. Invitations dried up. She called recruiters. At first, they answered politely, then cautiously, then not at all. One firm emailed her directly. "After reviewing your public conduct and employee records, we've determined that your profile presents a substantial cultural risk. We will not be moving forward." She tried smaller firms, boutique consultancies, startup ventures. Each time, the silence grew heavier. Because it wasn't just about a single misstep, it was about exposure. Public, documented, systemic exposure. Meanwhile, inside Carter and Wolf's executive wing, Julian Carter moved with quiet precision. He promoted Ava Hill to regional operations lead for the Western sector. He personally introduced her at a leadership summit, stating, "Talent, not tenure, drives the future of this brand." The applause was genuine. Elise Monroe accepted an offer to join the company's global communications division as creative strategy director. Her first campaign would focus on rebuilding trust and representation across luxury retail. She declined press interviews. She never claimed public credit for the article that started it all. Because the truth didn't need to shout. It had already been heard. As for the Sterling & Rose Beverly Hills location, Julian closed it. Not temporarily. Permanently. The store was stripped down, the space repurposed. In its place, a new concept emerged. Sleek, modern, open concept. Glass walls that reflected light but never blocked transparency. A new flagship opened on La Cienega Boulevard under the brand name Carter. The interior design was subtle, warm, and welcoming. Italian wood, neutral stone, ambient jazz, and art from Black and Indigenous creators curated throughout the showroom. Every employee underwent new training. Every customer was treated like they mattered. Because they did. At the center of the new store stood a single inscription, mounted on brushed platinum above the consultation lounge. It read, "Elegance has no color. Disrespect has no future." On launch day, the line to enter wrapped around the block. There were no press conferences, no ribbon cutting. Julian arrived late, alone and unannounced. He wore dark slacks, a white collarless shirt, and no tie. He walked the floor, spoke with the team, watched how customers were treated. He didn't identify himself. He didn't need to. His presence was known. Ava met him near the back, beside a private vault door etched with minimalist engraving. "You did it," she said. "No," Julian replied. "We did it." "What happens to the others?" she asked. "The ones still like Veronica, hidden elsewhere?" "We keep watching," he said. "We keep building better." Later that night, Julian stood in the center of the empty store, lights dimmed, city lights flickering beyond the glass. Elise walked in behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head on his back. "So this is what justice looks like," she whispered. Julian smiled, not because it was finished, but because it had begun. They didn't toast champagne. They didn't post to social media. They didn't need to, because some victories aren't loud. They're earned in the silence after the noise. In the space where truth is undeniable. In the rooms where names are remembered, not because they demanded attention, but because they stood for something when it mattered. The end. If you've been hooked by this journey so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. We're just getting started. What did you think of today's twist? Was there a moment that hit harder than you expected? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let us know where in the world you're watching from. We want to hear from you.